Good afternoon, everybody. And I've got a quick special request. If there is anybody who is not one of the presenters who has a microphone or is joining us by telephone, if you could make sure to mute your microphone or your phone. We need to keep the background noise to a minimum. And you will be able to ask questions. You can do that using the chat box at the lower left of your screen. Again, thank you for joining us. I am David Robinson. I'm the Director of Membership and Meetings at the Linguistic Society of America. We are the sponsor of this webinar. This webinar is the latest in a series organized by the LSA's Special Interest Group in Linguistics Beyond Academia. And the focus of today's webinar is the job recruitment process as seen through the recruiter's eyes, that is, from the other side of the table. Again, for those of you who've just joined us, if you could make sure that you either are in listen-only mode or that your computer microphone or your telephone is muted. And then you can ask questions at any point. You can do that using the chat box at the lower left of your computer. I'm going to turn the floor over now to our moderator, Anna Trester of the Frameworks Institute. But before I do that, I'll just remind you to check your email for some links I'll send around after the webinar, directing you to a recording of it, and also directing you to a special LSA membership discount offer. Thanks again, and here is Anna.
Thank you, David. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me, David?
Yes, I can hear you, and I think everyone else can too. They just can't respond.
Excellent.
Okay,
well, thank you, David, and thank you again to the LSA for sponsoring this, for hosting this webinar, and giving us this opportunity to speak to you all today. The students, this webinar is designed for students and graduates and professionals. And if someone who is typing could make sure that their computer is on mute, that would be great. We have a particular focus today on thinking about how you present your linguistic skills when you're trying to apply for a job. So it's thinking about how do you make the skills that you have as a linguist transferable? How do you make them understandable? How do you help people to see the value of your background in linguistics? And we've convened a group of professionals to share their perspectives on this process with you. Anastasia, and everyone will introduce themselves over the course of their presentation, so I will keep it short for now, but just to say that Anastasia is going to offer you the mentor's perspective, you know, what it is that she has to offer on this process from having seen it from the point of view of a mentor, helping students prepare for these job-seeking interactions. And Daniel is going to be talking to you from sort of the other end of the process, from a career researcher perspective. His work involves doing research to figure out where linguists and anthropologists have wound up with their professional training. So he's going to help us think a little bit more broadly, you know, not just linguistics, but also anthropology, and then to bring it even broader, social science. Melissa is going to offer us a recruiter's perspective. She's sort of the bridge, you know, the person in the middle of this process. And as you listen to them speak, I want you to think broadly about your own skills. And, you know, as you hear these experiences and the perspectives being offered, I want you to think about what it is that you could be asking about as regards your own skills, the transferability of your own skills, the questions that you have about how to make your skills more visible. And I want you to think about the fact that each one of these people speaking on this webinar has also done that. They have also presented themselves in such a way that they've been able to showcase how their skills and training are valuable. So these are the kinds of questions that you can ask them as well. So you'll hear again from me after Anastasia and Daniel and Melissa have spoken to you. But if you have a question, feel free to type it into the chat box at any time. I will be monitoring it throughout the talk. And I look forward to a discussion in about 30 minutes. And with that, I'll throw over to Anastasia.
Thank you very much, Anna. Can a couple of people put in the chat box if you can hear me, please? Fantastic. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. It is wonderful to see so many of you here, and a big thank you to the LSA and to our panelists today for taking the time to, you know, think and talk about the recruitment process for linguists who are looking for careers outside of what I like to call a traditional faculty role. Many of you might not have had any interest in a traditional faculty role, and this is obviously also excellent for you. So I work a lot with graduate students, and today I just want to share a few insights with you, kind of in a almost a little listy fashion about how you can begin to think about what you might want to do with your degree, how you might want to put it into practice. A little bit about me. I'm trained as a sociolinguist, and for the past 2 years I've held a higher education role at Georgetown University. I teach, I do research, I do academic administration, professional development activities, advising, and network building. Before I continue, I just want to say, for those of you who are perhaps PhD students who currently have teaching and research assistantships, do not forget, it's very important that you remember that you are currently higher education professionals. You've held several roles throughout your degree, and that is something to pay attention to if you do want to you know, continue working in higher ed, even though it might not be as an academic researcher. So I'm a director of a professionally oriented master's program here at Georgetown. The program is focused on training master's level linguists in sociolinguistics and discourse analysis and current analytic tools. And in addition, my job, aside from teaching and doing research, involves a lot of developing and providing professional development opportunities to our students. So the conversation that we're having today, I have these conversations a lot in my office. And the thing that I focus on primarily internally is advising. The questions that I get from students range from everything like the classic question, what can I do with my degree in linguistics? Some people know that they want to take their training to some super interesting place, but they're not sure what. Other people might be sort of dissatisfied with where their career is taking them, and they say things like, well, you know, I'm not getting what I want out of my job, but I'm not sure what it is about it that I want to change. And obviously the answers to these questions are as many as there are questions. But the thing that all of the people that I speak to have in common is that everybody can do themselves a huge favor by preparing as much as possible to be as ready as they can for as many opportunities as they can, because opportunities do present themselves even though you might think you have no idea where you're going. So I just want to share with you a couple of tips for where you can start if you're not sure about where to start. Daniel and Melissa will talk both more broadly and more specifically about various points of the process of your career. And I just want to talk a little bit about the career exploration stage. So things like self-reflections about your interests, your goals, your values, and your skills, as well as your professional preferences. You know, you can think, are you a collaborative person? Are you mission-driven? Are you very highly specialized? Are you happiest in groups or on your own? All of these things can help to discern a direction to go in currently. It's always easier to start from yourself rather than from things that you aren't familiar with and might be intimidated by. So for example, if you know that you love teaching, I would encourage you to think creatively about what it is exactly about teaching that is attractive to you. It could be a number of different things. It could be curriculum development. It could be the public speaking. It could be the one-on-one engagement. And those three things might lead you to think, sort of open up new avenues for exploration that you might not otherwise have had access to. Start talking to people rather than sit on monster.com and read job announcements that you might not understand because you're not familiar with the jargon of a particular field. These are things that can help you find a direction to start with. And finally, one thing that I would encourage you to do while you're in your degree program, or for the faculty amongst us today, to encourage your students to do while they're getting their degrees, is to continually take stock of the skills, the transferable skills that you develop in classes and through your research. So think about, for example, the actual sort of products that you produce and the components of, for example, writing a paper. You can probably come up with at least 5 discrete tasks that you've completed that can be talked about outside the context of linguistics in a way that people will understand and appreciate. And these tasks will become your examples of your work when you begin networking in your future field. You think you don't have a lot to offer, that is absolutely not the case. You just have to figure out how to say it. So those would be my 3 tips: is think about yourself, think about what you have done, and put yourself out there. I look forward to our discussions later. Right now, I would like to hand the stage over to Daniel Ginsberg, who will tell us a bit more from a professional linguist perspective. Thank you all. Daniel?
Hi all. Yes, am I good? You hear me?
Yes.
Great. So thanks, Anastasia, for the introduction. Thanks to also Anna and David and the LSA for setting this up. I'm glad to have the chance to talk to everybody about this topic. I want to pick up with one of the questions that Anastasia said is most common coming from her students. What can I do with a degree in linguistics? Which seems like obviously a very topical question. And from her perspective as an advisor of students, especially thinking of graduate students who are really identifying more as linguists, she talked a lot about ways that you can look at your own outlook and your own perspectives on things and try to figure out where you fit within the field. I have a sort of privileged perspective to be able to have a broader view. And so I'm going to talk about similar questions, but more from the perspective of what the field is and how we can think of the things that other people are doing. So you see in my bio, my job that I have right now is I'm a professional fellow at the American Anthropological Association. So the data that I have to talk about comes from the perspective of anthropology, but my background is also in linguistics, and I'm thinking about the ways that there are sort of transferable lessons that we can take from what I'm starting to learn about anthropologists and apply it to linguists as well. As professional fellow, my job really gets into 2 different areas. One of them is association research into the discipline and profession of anthropology, and the other is really focusing on what we call practicing and applied anthropologists, which is to say people who are doing jobs other than being professors. And so this chance to talk to you all today really combines those two things. And I can say, what does research tell us about people who are doing this job outside of traditional tenure track academic type jobs? My own background also took me there. So I studied linguistics. I did anthropologically informed linguistics. I focused on classroom interaction, and I was sure that I was going to get a job doing classroom-based education research. So my goal all along was for some sort of applied job, but the job that actually came along was working at the AAA. And so another lesson to take away from this is just that it's important to be open to unexpected things as you're looking at the vast diversity of things that people do with degrees in empirical social sciences, other than just being college professors. So I'd like to share a few ideas about practicing anthropology. This comes from my analysis of a member survey that we completed earlier this spring. I have a report that just came out today. I dropped the link into the chat window a moment ago, and I'll put it in again in case anyone wants to look at it. But I'm going to just share a couple of highlights from it. So the first thing I would say is that in the AAA, our members who are working outside of academia are equally split between nonprofit, government, the private sector, doing research in some non-faculty role, as like working for a nonprofit research institute or museum, or being self-employed as independent contractors. And so all of these different sectors of employment are things that are open to us as anthropologists and as linguists also. A lot of people work in fields of inquiry that are related to domains of anthropology. So for example, some of our members work in public health, related to work in medical anthropology. People work in historic preservation, which is related to archaeology. People work in evaluation, which is something you can really apply ethnography to do program evaluation. But also they do other things that I think are more broadly applicable within linguistics as well. So a lot of people have other sorts of jobs in higher ed other than being professors, like Anastasia talked about. People do administration in different sorts of ways, management consulting. People do social justice advocacy and community development. And all of these are things that linguistics in particular can be applied to, but also that the perspective that you have with looking at social problems analytically, or looking at relationships analytically, looking at the messy kind of data that comes out of real world interaction, it sort of flattens out the learning curve for you. So coming into that kind of a field, it's easier to pick it up. The other thing that I'm seeing is that this idea of what can you do with a degree in linguistics, it's not necessarily about linguistics. And so if we think of this as jobs for linguists, it's kind of a misnomer. In my survey respondents, among these non-academic respondents, 80% of them said that they were working in jobs that did not require training in anthropology. And if I limit it to bachelor's degree recipients, that goes up to 93%, so that their jobs did not require training in anthropology. But at the same time, 76% said it was helpful to them in getting their job. And 86% of them said that the skills and perspectives that they had learned through their anthropology training were useful to them in their day-to-day work. And I think these are things that would also apply to us as linguists as well. Even if your job is not linguistics per se, you learned other things that I'm sure Melissa is going to talk a lot more about that help you to do that job, even if it's not a job doing linguistics. And then the final thing that I would want to say is we asked our survey respondents about their level of job satisfaction. Between professors and others, we had a similar level, about 70% said that they were satisfied or very satisfied with their jobs. But then when I asked them about work-life balance, people working outside of higher education were much more satisfied. And so people who have other sorts of jobs, 57% of them said they were satisfied or very satisfied with their work-life balance, compared to only 44% of higher ed faculty. And so if you're thinking about reasons to consider other sorts of careers, and I know that some of you may currently be working as higher ed faculty, and this might be something that's driving you to look at other options. At least from the small data set that I have, it seems to be borne out that you have you're more the master of your own time if you're not working, if you're not chasing tenure. So that's what I had to share with you. I'm happy to answer more questions about that, or about the survey, or about my own career path. But now I would like to turn it over to Melissa.
Thanks, Daniel. Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you.
I hear you fine.
Thanks. My name is Melissa Reitkopp, and I know that you've seen the bio earlier, and it'll probably be on the screen later. I have been what you call a headhunter, and that is not a major in college that you can study. I like the fact that Daniel shared with you his career path, how he started out one way and then Anastasia started out in another way and ended up doing things that are very different. Possibly, not very different, but not the apparent career path. So I've been recruiting for 20 years. I work with master's and PhD prepared researchers. My clients are outside of academia and outside of the federal sector. And so I wanted to talk with you today about what a recruiter does and how we work and how we can help, and also share with you some of the tools that we use that I believe you can apply to your own career search. So first, a recruiter is hired by a company to identify talent. And that can be for a new position, for a recently vacated position, or to solve a problem within an organization. And what we
Sorry, Melissa, sorry to interrupt. I don't know if you're watching the chat window, but a lot of people are saying they're having a hard time hearing you. I don't know if there's something you could do to boost the audio a little bit.
Is this any better?
Much
better to me.
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, sorry about that. So I don't know if you missed all of that, but what a recruiter does, how we work, how we can help, and then how you can apply some of our tools to your own personal job hunt. So first, a company retains us to identify staff for them. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. And then, let me try something else. Is that better?
It sounds good, Melissa.
And I, with my community, I know, to talk about the opportunity from the company's perspective.
Oh no, that got much worse. So that got much worse. So whatever you did before, you just did that fix.
Any better?
That's the one.
Yes. I'm sorry. Technological peasant here. Okay.
Now you sound great.
So I go out and I look for the person that a client of mine wants, and that means skill identification. It means identification of the kinds of things that Daniel and Anastasia mentioned. You know, what do you like to do? What is it you do best? Where do you want to live? How hard do you want to work? What's the career path you think you want to go on? And some of these questions you may know the answers to, and some of them you may not, but they're good questions to start asking yourself. I interview someone. I figure out if I like their background and fit for the client that I'm working with. I get a resume from them. I will let them know if they need to improve it. I will coach them through the process of preparing for interviews, getting feedback, and negotiating salary. That's what I do, and that's how I can help. And it's great to work with a recruiter because some do what I do and some don't. But we can be incredibly helpful and insightful. And often when you interview, there's not that opportunity to address any objections or obstacles that someone might have in the process. But with someone like me, I can interpret that for both sides. The drawback is when you are new to your career, just getting out of school or transferring fields, it's harder to work with a recruiter because my clients are hiring me and paying me money for someone who has existing skills, and they don't always want to take a risk on someone who's transferring. So that's sort of a drawback. But you should know that there is no fee for someone who is job hunting. The money is always paid by the company. If someone asks you to do that, you don't want to. I wanted to cover some of the techniques that I use and share those with you as you're thinking of transferring your skills or breaking down what you've learned into skills that are useful to anybody. The first thing I would suggest is that, and you've probably heard this in school or in other places, is that you create an elevator speech or a biz pitch about yourself. And the reason I think this is really important is that, like Anastasia said, you have to step back and break down what skills you've learned or what expertise you've developed maybe in a class you took or in a project you worked on. And if you can break those skills out, suggested that they're transferable. You can use them across several different, apply them in different ways. So what I suggest to people is that you think about the things that you're best at or you enjoy doing the most. They tend to be your strongest skills. That you express those or explain those and show where you use them, what sector or in a project or an example, and then translate it to how you can add value to a company or how you could apply it. So this may sound like, wow, that's hard to do or that's easy to do, I don't know. But the way you get to that point is by networking and gathering information, like any research project, out in the field to learn about potential sectors that you might want to work in. So it's almost working backwards. So I suggest that people build their networks through informational interviews. And that's going to start with people that you know in your inner circles, family and friends. And then it can broaden to people you went to school with or colleagues. Or it's a good reason why you join an organization like the Linguistics Society of America. You have a built-in network. And you look at people's profiles. Use social media, Google them, look at LinkedIn, and look at people who are doing jobs that look interesting. And then you reach out to them for a 20-minute conversation to break down and learn about how did they get where they are? What did they like about what they're doing? How would they suggest you approach something like that? Or do they have other suggestions for you? People love to share information with people. Sometimes they might have a job that's not out there published online somewhere. Sometimes they might have an idea in mind, or they may know of something else. But that informational interview, people like that better than if you call them and say, do you have a job? And then I would say track all this information in an Excel spreadsheet so that you can start seeing patterns in the industry and what's healthy and what's not and which way to go. So I am going to stop there and wait for some questions.
All right, so it's Anna again. We'd love to get specific questions if you have something as specific as, I would like some help thinking about how to describe a particular competency, a particular experience. Remember that Melissa she's not a linguist, so this is an opportunity to try to test out, does this make sense? If I'm trying to talk about this particular experience this way, does that idea get across? I guess one place that we could begin while people are formulating their questions, Melissa, is, you described using the LSA as a place to begin. And I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on how somebody could use the LSA kind of to begin networking.
Okay, hopefully I'm doing the sound thing right now.
And we also have a question. Sorry, we have a question about more details about how informational interviews work. So I guess these questions kind of dovetail.
Okay, so informational interviews, I'm seeing other comments too. They're just really, really helpful. And I find that I'm always willing to do it, and it's like paying it forward. But an informational interview, there's actually a wonderful article from an old Forbes magazine that I can share the link to people. It talks about the way to get ready for them. You're going to prepare by doing homework about the company and the person, and you're going to make a list of questions. And you don't want to take too much time out of someone's day. You don't want to ask them for lunch or anything that gets really expensive. You could say, could I buy you a cup of coffee in the morning? That tends to be a good time when people haven't gotten in and stuck in work. And you ask them questions about their career path, and you ask them questions about the organization that they're part of. And you're gathering more information about the sector, and you're also providing them with current information about what you're hearing out there and or what you learned in school, and both sides gain something from it. They might have a potential need in the future, and they're trying to gauge that. So hopefully that answers that part. So Linguistics Society of America is a built-in network. Every single member in that organization has has a career or a background or is working in something related to linguistics. So when you're trying to brainstorm about different ways to apply your academic experience, it's a wonderful network. You can look at people's names, and then you can go Google them or look at LinkedIn, and then you can read about their academic background and training, their job careers. You can see the different places they've worked. So those are potential companies that you might want to consider looking into and seeing if they have opportunities. That's how I, as a recruiter, go about, when I'm looking for new clients. I'll look at where have people that I've worked with worked in the past, and I'll gather that. It's gathering research, data. So LSA it's a built-in network right there. So you have your alumni from the universities that you've attended, and you have a professional association. Those are two wonderful networks.
I love it.
Up there.
Well, we have another question for you, Melissa, and then we have a question that I'm going to throw out to the group, to the panel. But the specific question for you, Melissa, is how do we find recruiters in a particular geographical area? And for Anastasia and Daniel, I want you on deck thinking about this CV or resume question.
Okay.
But first, Melissa, how do people find recruiters in a particular geographical area?
I have a question. Can everyone see the chat box? Because somebody else added that you can look up connections through meetup groups, and that's a great suggestion. Okay. So my question is finding a recruiter for Geographical. So recruiters work in different ways. Some recruiters work in a field of expertise. So I work with master's and PhD researchers in the social sciences. Could be health, could be education, could be economic policy. So I work a type of person across industries, and I work a national or international market. So I've placed a few people internationally. I don't work as abroad as much as I would like. So I work across the United States. So different recruiters will do different things. Some will just work a local market. I think it's harder to find a recruiter if you're focused on one geographic area, but it's not impossible. I used to be part of a large network called MRI Network, and it's Management Recruiters International. And you could go on their website and search for a recruiter in your field and in your geographic area. And then when you are looking, it's sort of like finding a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant. You have to meet the person and you have to talk to them. And you don't have to meet them in person, but you're going to get a feeling for how they work and if you like their style. And if you don't work with them. Find somebody else. Thanks, David. That's the network.
Wonderful.
Great.
Anastasia or Daniel, do you have thoughts on this CV or resume question?
I'd actually like to follow up on the last question, if you don't mind.
Go for it, Daniel.
Because I think if we're talking about geographical areas, aside from thinking about recruiters in particular, I think for me that was a huge part of the reason that I decided not to go for an academic job. Because if you're trying to be a professor, you have to go where the jobs are, and I wasn't free to move. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So I think recruiters are one thing to do, but I think also the whole process of informational interviewing, networking, meetup groups, and if there are even local, what in anthropology is called local practitioner organizations. I don't know if that's a term that's used more broadly. Where people who are working in the same field in the same geographical area would get together for networking. Are other ways that you could look for jobs without focused on a certain geographical area, wanting to stay where you live, for example, which is what it was in my case.
And I would also like to plug everybody's, whatever your level of training or however long you've been out of your degree program, I would like to plug your alumni network. You can find people who graduated from your department even if you didn't know them. Chances are you can find them on LinkedIn, and a lot of people do very, very interesting things. And at least in my experience, having been on both sides of seeking people for informational interviews and being asked for informational interviews it's a treat to be able to share.
Can I add something about LinkedIn? been mentioned a couple times. LinkedIn is an amazing, amazing tool, and I use it, and I've been using it for, I don't know how long it's been available, 5, 6, 7 years. If you can get someone to instruct you on it, it's wonderful, but it is your friend. You should have a good profile because people use it, and again, when you're looking up a person, you can gain so much information from that page of where they studied, organizations they worked for. And when you put in a company on LinkedIn, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, it tells you of other companies that are similar or related. And so you can do the same thing with people too. And it's a wonderful, you could do searches on there. It's just, I can't say enough. If you're not on there, you should be on there. I mean, most of you use social media more readily than I do. It's just it's not Facebook. It's business, and people are talking about really interesting topics. And there are groups that you can join on LinkedIn as well. And I tried to post the Forbes article, but it's like an endless circle, so I apologize.
It came through.
Okay. I tried to click on it and open it. It didn't seem to work for me. But
address the CV resume question briefly?
Yeah.
Okay, my 5-second piece of advice, have both a resume and a CV. They do very different things. If you are somebody who identifies with research as a researcher and you want to have a good documentation of the products that you've created as an academic linguist, of course have a CV. Also have a resume. The CV and the resume look very different and they have very different goals, right? The CV is what it says on the tin. It is a full account of your productivity in your field over the course of however many years. Your resume is your baseball card. It's your stats and just a little bit about what you have done in the past. So while a CV needs to be kind of as long as possible, a resume should be and will be short if you pay attention to the things that are most important about the things that you've done and can articulate them very, very briefly. So do both.
I'll just chime in that here at the Frameworks Institute where I work, we use sort of a hybrid CV resume. We tend to hire people with PhDs, so there's a way that you want to be showing that you participate in that professional community by organizing your resume / CV hybrid in a way that indexes both of these. This is a question I asked when I was applying. If you can find a way to informationally interview people at the organization, this is a question to ask. Does your hiring committee prefer to see a resume or a CV, or is it a hybrid? And if so, which way is it leaning towards? Is it leaning more towards the academic or more towards the, the business, the resume flavor?
That's a really great point, Anna. I think that another thing to always remember is you don't just have one resume. You have one resume for every job that you apply to, and you'll be much better off if you get informed about what kinds of things an organization wants to see.
Tell me more about that idea, Anastasia. We have more than one resume?
Yes.
Oh, can I add to that, Anastasia, too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, go ahead.
What I actually suggest people do is that you keep a core resume that you add to all throughout your career, and it has everything you've done. And from that, it's what you do with, as Anastasia described, every opportunity that you're applying for, you have to know your audience. You have to tailor that resume using the buzzwords from the description or from the industry, because you're not always sure who's reviewing the resume. I would also say that I agree with both of you about the CVs and the resume, that you have to, again, know your audience. My social scientists, when I work with groups like Research Triangle Institute or Westat or Mathematica, they're science-y places. They want to see your publications. They want to see the things that are normally found in a CV. So you have to know your audience and tailor it accordingly. I would also say I'm not sending out blind resumes, and that's sort of why you go to the informational interview path. If you're applying online to positions, it's somewhat like a black hole, and there's a robot on the other end receiving it, and maybe HR will look at it, maybe the hiring manager will receive it from the posting. You have no idea. But if you find a company that's posting a job, and then you find someone on LinkedIn who works at that company, and you do an informational interview, and you guys hit it off, or you hit it off, they might be willing to submit your resume. As I just talked to this really interesting person, maybe we should talk to them. They may even get a referral bonus as an employee for referring a person. So I would really, really encourage the proactive style of exploring opportunities with a strong CV or resume.
Absolutely. One key difference, I think, between the CV and the resume, and this is something that can be, you have to do a little bit of massaging of your attitude towards these documents, especially if you have a longer time being somebody who has a CV. That's the thing that we value perhaps in academia, is that remember that the resume is not for you. It is for the organization that you're trying to, become acquainted with, for lack of a better term. The most important thing is that people don't have to dig too deeply to find the information that they're looking for. And so that's why it's key to be informed about what it is that they want to see.
You have about 20 seconds to capture someone's attention in a conversation or with your resume. I get a gazillion resumes a day, and people spend a lot of time on their cover letters. Sometimes most of the time I don't even read those. I look at the resume. So the way you open it and how you present it is really important.
Absolutely.
So I want to follow up on that question, Melissa. Another question has come in that I want people to be cogitating on, which is, are companies not prejudiced towards someone who is a graduate assistant or spent 4 or 5 years as a PhD student? I think this is an excellent question. I would like people to weigh in on this one, but first, I would like to ask the group, the participants, maybe to start typing in transferable skills, your favorite transferable skills, into the chat box. I think that might be kind of interesting for people to start seeing what transferable skills are people's favorites to talk about in the context of resumes and writing cover letters. But Melissa, something you just said just intrigued me. I want to follow up on that. And this is also to the question of transferable skills, keywords. What if you're going to look at somebody's resume for 5 seconds and they say that's about the average, what do you glean in 5 seconds? What do you look at? What are you looking for?
Okay. I'm looking for length of experience, what they've done, what their subject is, what their skills are, and what their industries are. So, and when I say skills, I'm talking about, are they a quantitative researcher? Do they know how to work with big data? Do they do analytics? Have they published? Have they presented? I mean, these are all things that I think you do in academia. I mean, my daughter's an undergrad in microbiology, and she got a poster published, and they sent her to a conference in San Diego. I mean, she was so excited. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. Grant writing, report writing, I see in the box. Anyone who works in contract research, the Westats, those kind of people, they have to write proposals. And so that's part of the skill set that you have. Research, data, yeah, that would be what I would say. The quant skills are really important to a lot of my people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. These are great transferable skills, and I would say people who are on Twitter, these are kind of fun things to be sharing on Twitter too, transferable skills. to me, I hear a story in each one of these, and that could spark a conversation. But I wanted to come back to this question of, are people prejudiced towards PhDs? Is this something that we need to be mindful of, aware of, worried about?
Well, in my sector, again, they would prefer a PhD. The question is, having spent all that time gaining all that knowledge, are you able to communicate in non-technical terms to lay audiences? Or can you do research or analytics, and can you apply it to real-world problems or challenges and find solutions? So your ability to translate your skills from a academic setting to, Daniel called it a practicing an applied setting is really important. Sometimes I find that my researchers get very caught up in and excited about the research and the methods or the techniques. And in the right environment, that's awesome. I mean, my sampling statisticians, that's what they can geek out on. But if I'm talking to the first person who is more interested in how can you help design my survey, and they may not be as statistically savvy, we have to tone down or use language that more audiences can understand. I don't think there's prejudice. I just think that, well, maybe it is a little prejudice. Academic training is not considered professional experience. And what I mean by that is if you're in school for 5 years earning your PhD, they consider that academic training, and that's valued, and they want that PhD. But when you did postdoc, that's considered professional training. And when you are in a business or an organization, they consider that professional experience. So sometimes that's something that frustrates people because you could be working all along while you're getting your training, but they don't always consider that.
Great. If I can jump in here a little bit, this is why I want to really, really encourage all of you to in addition to what Melissa said about perhaps the corporate perspective on the time that you spend in higher education being curricular, do really, really think critically and creatively about the actual work that you have done. Matthias had a question earlier about, well, this is the question that we're talking about now, is whether there is a prejudice against, folks who have 4 or 5 years worth of, quote, grad assistance on their resume. It's easy, I think, for PhD students to get dejected about the things that they do during their time in the PhD because it is extremely laborious and time-consuming and very sort of long-term commitment type work. But you can really, really do yourself a favor by breaking down the things that you do in the everyday and thinking about how to present them in a way that won't sound like, I haven't done anything, I'm just a grad student. If you think of yourself and you talk of yourself as, quote, just a grad student, and you haven't done that deep digging and put together a story about yourself, then perhaps you'll be doing yourself a disservice given the fact that professional organizations want to see what they consider to be professional experience. You just have to show it to them.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think it gets back to what you were saying before about how doctoral students are already higher ed professionals.
Yep.
And I think that a lot of what might get lost in translation, it depends on who your audience is. Something that keeps occurring to me through this conversation is the idea that any particular workplace where you might end up with this sort of academic background, they're going to sort of, you can organize them along a continuum from more to less academic-y. And that sort of also gets to your choice of whether you use a CV or a resume. If something is very further on the academic-y end of it, you're going to give them something that looks more like a CV. And if they're more on the less on the academic-y end of it, they're going to give you something that looks more like a resume. And I would even, for all of you sociocultural linguists out there, I would say that it's almost like style shifting, and it's recipient designed, right? Because you're indexing certain things about yourself and how you're positioning yourself in that interaction. This is talk that I only do with you. I don't use it in job interviews. But where was I going with that? Oh, yeah. If you're applying for a job that's less on the academic end of things, you might need to help them understand what it means that the fact that you've been doing a PhD, it doesn't mean that you have been just a student for 5, 6, 7 years. Although you have been working towards a degree, and although certain kinds of, if you're applying somewhere that has a specific way of allocating your time towards professional training versus professional experience, they might have to treat it in a certain way. But you can also pitch it as being work, right? If you have a research assistantship, that's part of the work. If you have a teaching assistantship, that's part of the work. If you are publishing and presenting at conferences, that is work that you are doing. It's work experience. And if you tell a potential employer, oh, I've just been in school for the last 5 years, you're not really helping them to understand what it is that you've been doing. It's not the same as being an undergrad where you really are just in school.
Can I add something? Daniel, that's a great point. And what you were talking about is the translation. It's one thing to list all sorts of skills or to tell someone tasks that you did, but the burden falls on the person looking for the job or interviewing to translate what that means to a potential employer, to be able to tell them how you can add value. And it's true, you're working incredibly hard in your program. And I just talked to a recent PhD student who he's been out a couple of years now, but he had a publication list that was incredible, and he had published in some top journals. And what he said he did during his academic training was that he talked with his professors about the subjects he chose to do research on and how to prepare them or gear them for publication. So he was actually anticipating building his resume while he was during his academic training. So it's being conscious and aware of these kinds of things as you go along. But I would emphasize the translation of, instead of just telling someone, show them how you did something that could be applicable to what they do.
So I want to say, I just wanted to say, keep the skills coming. We've got great ones like simplifying the complex, neutral questioning, structuring arguments to sell ideas and services, communicating technical content to lay people. These are excellent examples of how we can translate the really intricate skills that we cultivate as part of studying, something as technical as phonology, right, to someone who isn't as well versed with our nomenclature. Anastasia.
And sorry.
Just one little point. I know people are often, we always want concrete examples. What can I do? And it can be, it can be both inspiring and perhaps sometimes, frustrating to be sort of diving into something that you're not sure is going to pay off. So I'm going to give the students amongst you and the faculty who might be having these conversations with students just a little tip about how a concrete thing to prepare yourself. If you have the opportunity, if you're interested in a particular career and you maybe already know like a few companies that work within that field, find out what they do, find out what kinds of social questions, geographic regions, analytic tools that they engage with, and while you're in your degree program, think about finding ways to engage with those same questions. It will give you an opportunity to then, when you do make contact about employment, to be able to speak to what they're already doing. So make those connections, make your degree and make your papers and things like that really work for you. Be creative about how you put together, just like Melissa was saying about the PhD student who was really, gearing his work towards publication with the informed opinion of his professors. You can do similar things while preparing for a career, even though you're not sure exactly what that's going to be.
I wanted to pick up on a conversation that I saw happen between participants in the thread where someone had said, I know people who aren't quite sure what to do with a PhD person. And one of the responses was, it's up to the PhD person to guide them. And I think this is applicable. This is certainly applicable beyond, speaking about students who have a PhD. I know that one of my first jobs, I was hired as a linguistic researcher for a film called Do You Speak American? We were working on developing the website that would support the film. And I was hired specifically because I was a linguistic researcher, but it was the first time that I had been employed because I was a linguist. And I showed up on that job, and I was eager and ready to go. And I think it was a bit of a shock to my system. I had been in student mode as I had been applying for the job and interviewing for the job. And in the interview, they had given me questions, like how would you handle this task? How would you respond to this question? They were coming to me with the projects, and then I came to start the job, and the tables kind of switched, and they were like, all right, so you tell us how to use you. And I remember being a little bit, of course I shouldn't have been surprised, but in the moment I had sort of gotten caught up in the drama of applying for and interviewing for the job, and sort of lost sight of the fact that I'm driving the car, right? Like I have to show up and I have to show them how to use me. So they were expecting me to delve in and tell them, this is what you're lacking, and this is what you're needing, and this is the research that I'm going to do, and here's why, and this is why you hired a linguist. And I think it can behoove us to be thinking that way from the very beginning, even as you're applying for jobs, to be thinking that way, that it's your responsibility to show them the things that they're not thinking about that you are, because you've been trained as a linguist, the things that you notice, and not in a pushy, overly aggressive, overly arrogant sort of a way, but in a real, I am bringing my competency to the table. There is something that I see that you probably aren't paying attention to. There are things that we notice. We have heightened observation skills. We have a heightened awareness, particularly when it comes to structuring, strategizing. I'm noticing a lot of these coming up in the skills chat box. Summarizing content for different audiences, perfect, exactly. And one question, I saw someone in a thread a couple turns back wrote industries, question mark. I didn't know what that question was. Was it a request to talk about some of the industries in which people work?
No, it addressed when Melissa was saying that a job seeker needs to be able to show what their skills are and what their industries are. I think the person was looking for clarification about what she meant by what are your industries.
So it could be that you worked in the non-for-profit environment. You could have worked in a consulting environment. You could have worked in a government organization. Those are types of organizations, or it could be in different verticals. You could have worked in healthcare or education or economic policy. So those are the industries that I'm talking about.
And if you're not used to thinking in terms of industry, returning to LinkedIn, I think LinkedIn has one of the most comprehensive lists of industries. They probably had to, because they had to develop a drop-down menu for people to indicate what their industry is, but I haven't seen such a comprehensive list of industries anywhere else. You don't tend to be thinking about the work that you do, the research that you do, as being housed within an industry. Maybe spend some time digging around in the industry section of LinkedIn, just to use that to help you, again, think about the work that you have done already from a different vantage point.
They also used to have functionality where you could say, what are the industries where people with degrees in linguistics work? What are the industries where people with degrees in linguistics work in New York City? And you could get search results on all of these. They are in the process of revamping their search functionality. So last time I followed my old link to get to that page, it didn't work anymore. But if you dig around, they might have something new.
So we're coming up on time. So if you're sitting on a question, jump on in there. It looks like we got one. How do recruiters and employers look at people who quit without defending their thesis?
They quit?
So if you were pursuing a grad degree and you did not finish the thesis or the dissertation.
You want an easy one? It's very easy. You write, if you've finished your comprehensive, you're considered ABD, all but dissertation. And you need to come up with a very short, concise reason why you decided to opt for that versus continuing to do your thesis. Sometimes it could be that you would rather apply your skills. Sometimes it could be for personal reasons. But ABD still means you finish your coursework, and that is a lot of work, and that needs to be recognized. And you do still have the opportunity to go back to do your thesis, so it's something to consider. But you need to come up with full verbiage for when people ask you. But ABD is acceptable if that's truly your status.
Great. Well, we are continuing to get questions, so I hope that this indicates that we will continue this conversation. I hope that this is the beginning of a conversation and not the end. For people on the panel, what is your preferred way of being contacted if somebody, were to have wanted to ask you something and weren't able to get the question in during the allotted time? Do you have preferred ways of being contacted, being communicated with?
This is Anastasia. Email is always very good for me, and it is my first name dot my last name, so Anastasia Nylund, at georgetown.edu.
How about you, Daniel?
Depending on how involved it is, I'm happy to have these conversations on Twitter, or you can email me. And mine is first initial last name, D. Ginsberg, at americananthro.org.
For me, I know...
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, would it be safe to say that if we put our emails in the chat box, everyone could see them?
Oh, sure. That's good. Good way to think, Melissa.
I will also put my my Twitter handle in case anyone wants to tweet me.
And I know that for me, I absolutely am a LinkedIn girl. So find me on LinkedIn, Anna Marie Trester. So I want to thank everybody. I hear the clock chiming in the background, so it's time. But it's been a tremendous panel. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to participants for such excellent questions. And thank you to the LSA for affording us this opportunity.
And thank you, everyone, for participating, and thank you especially to our presenters. It was a really terrific discussion. And again, I'll follow up later with everyone to let you know when a recording of the webinar is available, and also to share the links that were discussed here, and to talk about a special discount LSA membership offer. So thanks again, everyone, and we hope to see you again soon at a future webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.